Hello, my friend, and welcome to our second interview of the Help Me Understand podcast series. Today, my guest is Teagan Schweitzer, who is one of my favorite yoga teachers. If you tuned into last week's episode with Kristen, both of these teachers teach a similar style of yoga on the Lit Yoga platform. And when I found Teagan's classes on there, I was instantly in love. As a yoga teacher, I'm always listening out for how other yoga teachers structure their classes. And Teagan teaches classes that I wish I could teach. She has a huge movement background, which we'll get into in the episode. And that really sets her up well when she's teaching yoga to do so in a very creative way. She has a creative approach to sequencing where she strings together movements that you wouldn't necessarily think go well together, but she does it in such a smart way where my body feels very prepared for the next crazy thing that she's going to make me do. And I always get very excited about it because I end up feeling more capable and surprising myself in ways that I didn't know I could move. Her timing of things is very fluid, almost dance-like, which you'll find exactly why that is in our conversation together. And her verbal cues, I wish that I could cue a yoga pose so succinctly. She says all of the most important things in the right order, in the right timing, and leaves out all of the fluff in a way that makes me feel like I'm just a rambling, yappy yoga teacher. So I definitely encourage you to check out Teagan's style if this sounds like something that sounds good to you. But mostly what I want you to take out of today's episode is Teagan's overall feelings towards movement. She started movement as a dancer very early in life, and movement has always been a very big and non-negotiable part of her life. It's very different from me. I'm a couch potato. I avoid movement. I pretty much only do it because I know it's good for me and I know I have to, but it is not a joy, typically speaking. It's much more joyful now than it ever has been in the past, and moving more so in that direction, largely in part from help, but from people like Teagan, people who have always experienced that joy for movement and have somehow been able to impart it to the rest of us. So if you're someone like me for whom movement doesn't always feel so great, when you go to move your body, things feel inaccessible to you, maybe a little bit painful. Maybe it even brings up all these memories of the ways in which you failed yourself in the past, right? And so that's totally normal. And I give you full permission to be exactly where you are in your journey. But today's episode will help you move from your current state and just chip away a little bit more into the zone of moving for the joy of it. I can't wait to share our conversation with you. So without further ado, here we go. Welcome, Teagan. Thank you so much for carving out the time in your day to have this conversation. I'm so excited to get into it with you.
I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so looking forward to today's conversation because as a movement teacher, I think about these things a lot. And that is that movement is very difficult for people for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it has to do with being motivated to get up and move. Sometimes there's an injury at play. Sometimes it's just, I don't like the feeling of moving and of the muscles burning in my body. And to be honest, I've been that person in each one of those areas. Growing up, I was very much a couch potato. My idea of a good time was sitting on the couch and watching the Disney Channel. You asked me to get into gym class, my worst idea in the world. I'm like making up excuses to go to the nurse's office.
And I was really only motivated to change that in college when I realized, oh, this isn't sustainable. I was starting to gain weight. Things were feeling a little bit funky. I just didn't like how I looked when I looked at myself in the mirror. So as I started getting into movement, I found yoga, and that was just such a wonderful addition to my life, something that I actually looked forward to. And I was surprised to find that. And then somewhere along the line, I started injuring myself. Some of those injuries happened in yoga, and some of them happened outside of the mat. But that was a very difficult thing to navigate. And then I've also had issues with the motivational aspect of it. Nowadays, I practice yoga on my own in the mornings, and I've really had to make a concerted effort to make this a part of my morning routine. I've had to do a lot of research on motivation and basically kind of come to the conclusion that motivation is not really important, and whether I feel like doing something should not be the deciding factor in whether or not I do it. What should be the deciding factor is, what kind of person do I want to be in the long run when I'm 80 years old and I'm looking back on this beautiful life? And so I know that this problem exists not just for me, but for so many people. And in my morning routine that I do my yoga practice, your classes are one of the ones that I look forward to the most. I love practicing yoga with you because the pacing is just so well thought out. The amount of time we spend in poses and how things move to the next thing, it's just chef's kiss. I also love the creativity you bring to the sequences. You're always putting something in a sequence that is unexpected, but somehow my body feels primed and ready for it. So it's like this exciting thing of like, yay, I get to do this thing that I wasn't expecting. And by the way, it feels awesome, which is just a dream come true. And then the way that you coach us through it, like the verbal cues that you use, I find to be, you say just the right amount of words. I am always falling prey to saying way too many words or not enough words, or saying words that are just kind of outside of the bullseye, like that's not the center of what we should be talking about here. And I find when I take classes with you, you are always saying exactly the right thing and putting my attention in the right place in my body. And because of this, you strike me as a person for whom movement is a very intuitive thing. I could be very wrong about this, and this is what I want to explore with you today. But to me, you seem like someone who sort of has this amazing relationship with your body, and you have a good sense for how to use it. And you don't strike me as somebody who avoids movement at all or who has issues getting to the yoga mat. And so I'd love to begin today's conversation by really understanding your background and what your relationship with movement has been over the course of your life.
Sure. Well, I grew up as a dancer, started dancing at the age of 3, and continued to do that until adulthood, even very recently. It's been more or less a part of my life for forever. And it, for a very long time, was exactly how I defined myself. I mean, I still walk around with a bun on my head, in part because it's a sign to other people that I dance. And so I like the subliminal messaging of that. And dance can be hard on your body, and it also can promote certain ways of viewing your body. And over time, I, had small injuries from dancing and a complicated relationship with how I saw my body as a physical thing. I was looking for other ways. And I actually had a, relatively bad injury, which was a torn labrum in my right hip. Soon after I came to Philly for graduate school, and I couldn't really dance. And so I had this kind of
situation where I really was used to moving, relied on movement to feel connected to who I am, who, define who I am, but then I suddenly couldn't do the thing that I had always done. And that's when I found yoga. And a friend of mine took me to a class, and I was like, this is awesome. This is like what I'm going to use to fill the gap that I now suddenly have. And that was about 20 years ago. And since then, I've done a ton of yoga in a million different styles, and, studied it very intensively, um, and learned a lot, and also have a much, I would say, better relationship with my body because of some of the teachings that are part of the conversation in yoga, where we don't view our body as like a problem to be solved, but more as something to be supported. And that's really what I look for, and what I try to accomplish in my teaching is a way to support and better understand my body, to have an idea of a long trajectory where I will stay as capable as possible for as long as possible. And that is what I want to offer to other people in my teaching, which is why I tend to uh, challenge people, because I know that they're more capable than they think they are. And, some people are up for the challenge, and other people are like, this is a little too much. And I'm fine with that. I've always been, in every yoga studio I've taught at, the hard teacher. But that's also a bit of a dance teacher background that I have. Like, dance teacher walks in the room, they expect perfection, and that's just how it goes. And I don't expect perfection. I've certainly learned a lot to soften around that. And also, as I learn more about bodies and biomechanics, there is no one right way to do anything unless you're doing it for the visual aspect of it, in which case then you can define that's the way a body, whatever body, should do this shape. But when it comes to movement in a more general sense, there isn't one way. And even one person's body is going to do something differently from time to time of, executing a particular movement. And there isn't anything wrong with that. And in fact, there's a lot right in that space of exploration of like how to do something. And there isn't one way for one person, for 100 people, for 1,000 people. And so the ability to like guide someone through an experience of movement where they have the opportunity to filter through what you're offering into their body and come up with something that works for them. That's what I'm aiming for.
Thank you so much for sharing your backstory with me. There's so many interesting pieces of it that I almost want to kind of go back chronologically and ask a few follow-up questions. So the first thing that struck me about what you said was that you started dancing at the age of 3. And 3 years old, was this like an interest that you had developed on your own that your parents were supporting? Or were your parents also in dance or some other type of, are they really exercise driven and they just wanted their kid to get involved in this as early as possible?
My parents are not dancers, and they're not really athletic.
Okay.
They're not couch potatoes. They do like walking, and my dad plays golf, and my mom now does yoga with me once a week.
Nice.
But my grandmother was a dancer, and she danced into her 80s, and dance was such a big part of her life. And I think that was probably part of why my parents, both my sister and I, were put into dance at 3 years old. I imagine that I was dancing around the house and they were like, this seems like something she would like. Yeah, but I'm not for sure as to what the decision-making process was at that time. But certainly I know that when I did my first performance, I was the one center stage who knew the choreography, who was telling the other people that they were doing it wrong and like, get it together. That was me from the beginning. So it was a good fit in terms of my skill set that I innately had.
Interesting. What kind of dance was it?
it was ballet to start with, and then when you get to 10, you could take some jazz classes, and then you graduate in ballet to do point classes, and then
Mm,
over the years, it's many other styles on top of that. So that's like in a classic dance perspective, a good way to develop technique is to start with the more classic forms and then build out from there.
got it. You said something about, in the world of dance, there was some aspect of the relationship that you had with your body and how you viewed yourself, just in the context of the whole dance world. Can you let me peek under the hood a little bit of that? Like, what was that experience like for you? What ended up happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's uncommon that dancers see their bodies as problems to be solved,
Interesting.
because, as I was mentioning, dance looks for a very specific body type, the shapes that you make. So, the even the how much arch you have in your foot is either a good thing or a bad thing. And if you don't have good feet, that's the thing you work on super hard to try to get a better arch in your foot. Or how flexible are you? Can you get your leg up to your head? If not, you better be working on that all the time. How backbendy are you? If your back doesn't bend very much, you better be working on that all the time. So there's just like a lot of things that, because it's a particularly in a classical ballet sense, looking for you to perform something to look a certain way. Um,
Mm,
Everything that's standing in the way of you looking like that can be then seen as a problem, and that you have to figure out a way to resolve it or work around it and all of that. On top of that, if you're a serious dancer, even when I was in college dancing 4 hours every day during the week, 8 hours on the weekends, um, you're staring at yourself in a mirror for that many hours. And of course, you can be pretty critical of yourself if you have to do that, which is why I've appreciated, having yoga spaces where there aren't necessarily mirrors. It's kind of, varied depending on where I've taught and practiced over the years. But I do think that there is a benefit to having a mirror and also to not having one. And just depends on kind of where you are in your journey, in your mental relationship with your
mm,
body, your perfectionist tendencies, and all of that stuff, whether it's going to be a positive or a negative.
mm. Yes, that's so interesting. Um, just a sidebar on the whole mirror aspect of it is, I same thing. There's many yoga studios that I've taught at or that I've practiced at that have mirrors and that don't have mirrors. And there's, some, and it's weird. It's like almost practice by practice, like how I'm kind of wired into my perception of myself when I walk in. It's like, is today going to be the day where I look in the mirror and I'm just seeing flaws and criticizing myself? Or is today going to be the day that I'm looking in the mirror and I'm gaining that proprioceptive feedback of like, oh, I thought my shoulder was doing this. Like the teacher told me to do this. I'm doing this. And I look in the mirror and I'm like, I am not doing that at all. Oh my gosh.
Right.
So with the whole, that's so fascinating to me about dance looking at your body like it is a problem to be solved. And I can completely see what you mean now that you had given me those examples and explained it a little bit. Does that factor into your hip labrum tear injury?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it's, a direct result of, at that point, 20 years of dancing,
Was it
and you're
anything
in dance.
specific?
I think it was over time, and then it just, happened in a specific dance class, for sure. But, in dance, you have a good leg and a bad leg. Generally, you have the leg that you kick up to your head, and that's the leg that when you perform, you kick it every time. And of course, a movement pattern like that is not balanced side to side in the body is going to cause more imbalances over time as you repeat it over and over and over. And at a
Yes.
certain point, your body might say, like, that's enough. And that's where I got to. That was enough.
So how is dance factored into your life these days?
Well, I would certainly say not as much as I would like. I occasionally, even fortunately yesterday, get to go out dancing in like a social fashion, with like a DJ and stuff like that. I not that long ago, I have a performance group that I performed with for almost 15 years. We get to have occasional shows, and that it's kind of all different styles. And I did professional salsa dancing for 5 years, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, which I really enjoyed.
Mm,
And occasionally I'll go out and salsa dance for a night. But it's hard with the work schedule that I have to like carve out time for it. So it is something that I try to incorporate a little bit of into the yoga classes that I teach. Like I joke all the time that this is a yoga class. It's a dance class masquerading as a yoga class. Like that there's an
mm,
underlying essence of danciness, something that's like just a dancer vibe. And I know that other fellow dancers connect with that because they're like, oh my God, I love
mm.
your class. And I'm like, I know, it's because you're a dancer as well, or you're a current dancer or whatever, so there's just like a language or a feel that, that you can connect with if you've had a similar background.
Yes, I mean, was a theater major, so I've taken dance classes, but never seriously, and it was always the discipline that I was avoiding the most. But now that you say that about your classes, I wonder if that's the pacing that I'm sort of picking up from you. Is like there's like this rhythm and this pulse that's carrying it through the class. And I feel like, sometimes I will stop the rhythm of a movement to explain something. And I find that you hardly ever do that. You're like mostly keeping the body moving. And you're like, well, this is the pace that we're going through. And now I have this amount of time to say what I need to say. So I'm going to pack a punch and I'm going to say these 5 words and then we're moving on. And I wonder if that is the dance integration in the whole thing.
I think I've never thought about it that way, but I think you're right that underlying expectation of rhythm is
Mm,
how I personally like to move. And one of the things that I think is a value add from the yoga perspective is that, and especially in the style that I teach, is that you often have multiple opportunities to do a certain transition, to repeat a certain shape. And so the rhythm can like hold you in that motion, but then you can start layering on as the teacher, thinking about X, Y, or Z. How could you refine it? What could you pay attention to? And then that can evolve the experience of that transition or shape each time rather than
mhm,
having to like get it all at once and then try to operate all of that while you're doing it. I think that's probably more along the lines of how I view it, although it can depend by class and how complicated stuff is, or if I'm creating a whole new movement, which happens all the time, and that's one of the nice things about lit is that you can just make up a new shape and it's part of what you're teaching that day, and you don't have to have a name for it, but usually it's good to come up with some way to reference it.
totally. Yes. I also love that about lit is the we're not beholden to the classic yoga shapes. It's like if this shape serves our body today because it's something varied and interesting for the brain, we're going to do it. Let's go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I also I like to push the boundaries because I've been doing this style for long enough now and following other teachers of the style and kind of inputting it into my body and seeing how it's impacted by doing it this way. And then I also have, past experience of other movement practices and then how my body felt during that and wanting to not let go of everything that's come before, but to like integrate some of the stuff that I have as my background so that it it's not a straight line, that there's always room for like pulling other stuff in or playing with other movements. It all can become part of the same conversation, and you never have to like give up on a shape or a movement as, not appropriate anymore, not functional. Like you can still have conversations with all of the movements that you've ever done or could ever conceive of, and just see how they feel in your body and whether you want to repeat them again. And if not, then you just don't do it. And maybe next week you will.
I love that. You starting dance at 3 years old and getting into it very competitively and then you also saying you were on stage and you were like, I'm taking the spotlight here. This is my jam. Did you always enjoy the feeling of using your muscles and moving your body? Or was there ever a time in your life where you were just like, nah, this doesn't feel good? I mean, aside from being injured, obviously, was there ever a time where you were just like, I don't like this, but I'm going to keep doing it because I'm on this path?
I can't specifically remember a case with dance, but not that long ago, I decided I would take up running, which is not something I had to do, except for in gym class, and like we ran the mile on rare occasions, but not anything I ever did repeatedly and willingly. And so at a certain point, I did decide to take up running, and I hated it the entire time. And yet I still did it, well, I started out the first year, I ran 2 miles every day for a year, just as, it was actually, I convinced myself to do it as a way to improve my cardiovascular capacity for competitive salsa dancing, where you have to dance full out for like 2.5 minutes straight, and having a better cardiovascular system was pretty critical to doing that. So it was just like an easy add-on to my life, and to achieve that. But then I took it in and did it in other ways, in like local running groups and running a half marathon and things like that. And like I said, I never enjoyed it because in part I'm slow, because I'm a dancer, and my tendons and ligaments are not fast twitch. My muscles aren't in the fast twitch fashion. They're more in the and elongated. So it's the exact opposite of what I had been doing my whole life. And I'm sure I could get faster, and I did improve over the time that I did it. But it was never fun for me. And it just was something that I did for community, for friendship, for those other physical benefits. And then at a certain point, I had pretty bad sciatica and I had to stop. And that led me down other paths of like movement and training stuff that has been great, but all kind of with the idea of like getting my body back to a place where I could run without significant pain. And that has been a long journey.
Where are you now with that?
I don't run. I think I could run. I'm like, I would say, on the precipice of feeling sorted out enough that it would be possible, but also unwilling to risk the severe discomfort, and enjoying the other things that I've put in place of that, which are more dynamic and also more intellectual, which is one of the things that I decided at a certain point. I mean, I'm sure I always viewed dance in an intellectual fashion. That's kind of my personality, but I made a concerted choice at a certain point in my career to take my intellect and apply it to yoga studies. Whereas I also have a PhD in anthropology. So that was where my focus was prior to getting my PhD, was to put my intellect into those studies. But the career that I have working as an archaeologist doesn't require very much intellect. And so then I needed another place to use my intelligence, and it made sense for me to apply that in the yoga sphere, and additional studies even outside of yoga, and how to make movement make more sense and be able to help both myself and more other people through the knowledge that I have, building on top of my intuitive sense of movement.
Mm. So with kind of finding your intellectual sweet spot with yoga, like yoga is such a vast discipline and there's so many different styles of it. And, for me personally, I found that a certain style can serve me in a certain phase of my life. And then I sort of outgrow it and I need to find something else. And how has your journey with yoga been? Like, where did you start? And then what were sort of like the milestones along the way to where you are now with your practice and your teaching?
Sure. I started with a power yoga, and that was the style that my friend who was doing yoga after I was injured took me to, like a Baron Baptiste style power
Mm-hmm.
yoga. And I found a local studio that was a few blocks from where I lived, and I just started going every day. And then within a year, I took a teacher training at that studio to start to teach, in large part because I missed teaching dance, which I had grown up teaching. And I really wanted to be a movement instructor. And also, there's a lot of people who have bachelor's and master's degrees in dance in Philadelphia, where I live. And I figured they would probably have more luck getting jobs teaching dance than I would. So, and I was enjoying the yoga. So I took a teacher training and started teaching. And I taught for 7 years at this power yoga studio. At a certain point, the structure and the diversity of poses in the power yoga sequence um, just got boring for me. And I'm sure it's not the case at every studio, but there was, just only so much knowledge and information there. I enjoyed teaching it. The reason I liked it at first in part was the heat. It's the idea of like, oh, I'm getting a better workout because I'm in a hot room, which I, don't necessarily subscribe to these days, but I did enjoy that. And also was a wonderful community. So once I determined that I was bored out of my mind and I needed more, I started going to another local studio that was a Ashtanga Vinyasa studio and taking classes there, and eventually took their teacher training as well, and started incorporating more of that into even what I was teaching at the power yoga studio, which at a certain point became problematic because they were like, do you teach power yoga anymore? So, you know, so I did that teacher training and I started teaching some Ashtanga Vinyasa style classes for a few years. But I also then started to get into Anyasara yoga. One of the teachers at that studio was teaching that, and I dove down that. That was because of a pulled hamstring that I had gotten in one of the Ashtanga Vinyasa classes, and those Anyasara classes were what helped me to heal my hamstring strain or whatever it was. And so what I was looking for as I started to, put the pieces together in my brain was what I felt would be a sustainable style of yoga. Like what
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to understand was like how to move your body, how to place your body so that you can stay safe, but still work hard and, get in a strong practice. And so then I went and took an Anyasara teacher training with that teacher, and I taught at her studio for 7 years. And I also took a bunch of training, basically 500 hours of training in what's called Yoga Hour, which is a teaching technology as well as a style of yoga. And that is what I would attribute my strong cueing skills to, because it's very based in effective and efficient languaging. And so for 7 years, I was very focused on how I said something, what it was conveying, how I could be succinct in the way that I was saying things, and working from a script of that kind of languaging and then building on it on my own. So that was certainly super helpful to making me become the teacher that I am today, and being able to effectively communicate what I'm looking for in terms of movement. And then then I eventually found lit, and it felt more in line with what I was actually looking for when I found Anusara yoga, which was something that is biomechanically sound and intelligent movement that, and this is like not a knock on any other styles of yoga, this is more like what I was looking for me. I think that every style of yoga has practitioners that benefit from it, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, because obviously I've done all of the ones that I'm mentioning for extended periods of time, but for me at the moment, lit and then the additional stuff that I've learned after those 500 hours of training really was giving me the additional knowledge about our bodies and how to move them and move them well, and kind of just the whole language around that in terms of sustainability. And then also it felt like a good fit for my creative outlet, and I really feel like my classes are the way that I have a creative outlet that I can contribute actively into the world. And so this style currently feels like a good fit for that.
Mm. Wow, you've been through so much, from the hip labrum tear to the strained hamstring and the sciatica. And I'm so curious, from your perspective, what have you learned about keeping your body safe while exploring movement?
Yeah. I mean, I think all of my injuries have been motivation for me to better understand exactly
Mm-hmm.
that. Because I didn't ever want, for me to have an injury that would take me out would feel like the end. That's the last thing I want. So
Yeah.
it's always a question of, what can I still do? What do I need to learn in order to be able to better understand and support myself, so that this isn't the end of my movement? That I am never going to give up on that. And that's also very much tied to like my experience of happiness and joy in my life. Just like I feel better, I'm happier, and I feel like I'm contributing more through my teaching when I am moving. And so if that ends, then all of those things are like the negative repercussions of that. So I'm highly motivated to be able to keep moving because I want to feel better. And I also then feel much more capable to help anyone else through the education that is necessary to find the supportive practices, whether it be a particular style or just like an avenue of learning and viewing the body and deeper understanding that comes along with essentially saying, I'm never just going to say this is too much and I'm stopping. Um, yeah.
I love that. It's such a unique perspective, because you are somebody who had a very intense relationship with movement from such an early age, that it's sort of become, at least it sounds like it, a non-negotiable in your life. Like, no matter what, I need to figure this out so that I can continue to do this. Whereas, in my sort of experience with movement and injuries, there have been times where I've moved and I've injured myself, and I've sort of then questioned the whole movement thing and been like, well, maybe this really isn't for me. Maybe I would be better off just sitting on the couch and sitting this one out. Maybe exercise is something that some other people do. And I've also learned through my history with injuries. I had a busted hamstring from yoga, like a shoulder blade thing from yoga, and some other things from off the mat that get triggered on the mat sometimes when I'm just not moving in the most sustainable way. But I really learned through all of that I need to keep moving and I need to keep adapting and figuring out what these injuries are asking of me, because they're usually asking me, hey, don't stop, just do something in a different way. And that has been, for me personally, a helpful approach to kind of make it through to the other side, where I'm currently, nothing is like super bothering me in my body, but I get little twings of things every now and then that are just like, I take them as the little reminder of like, well, like I haven't been on my yoga mat for 2 days. Maybe that's why. Or, I haven't been using my glutes when I've been walking around the city and now my hamstring is bothering me, like these types of things. And that has been really helpful for me. And it sounds like your whole, like the way that you are programmed around movement is just, it's always going to be a big part of your life. That's how you seem to me.
I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of other, being a yoga instructor, and that's not my only career, but it certainly is the one I spend the most time on, is not easy. And it takes a lot of effort and energy, and it is really hard to be adequately compensated for it. And so there's this tension between working in a field that, doesn't require any less, and often I would argue requires more energy output without the financial compensation that you could get from working a desk job.
Yeah.
And there's an ease of finding a company to work 9 to 5 for with a 401k and benefits that could be quite appealing. And that wouldn't mean that I would give up on my movement practice, but it would certainly change it a lot. And at the moment, I don't think that's what I personally need, although it's a strong pull. And as you go out every day and teach until you're exhausted, sometimes you feel like you don't want to do it again the next day. And that, I mean, sometimes things happen and things are a lot. So I certainly will keep moving, but part of why I keep moving as much as I move is because of the choice that I've made to teach for a living. And that motivates in and of itself. I mean, in terms of just to touch on something you were mentioning before, like when I've gotten injured, I have viewed that as one, either I should do whatever I'm doing slightly differently, or two, find some other way to move. Because there are so many different viewpoints about how to move and how to move well. And there's not a right answer, but there might be a right answer for you right now. And so that has always led me to further explore what and how else I can move, and not wanting to feel bound by any particular style, or even even if it's not yoga. I do a lot of not yoga, and I bring my education from doing those other things into how I teach yoga.
Yes, thank you for bringing up the whole teaching aspect of it, because I totally feel you there. There's like once upon a time I was like a strung out yoga teacher teaching 25 classes a week, and it was just like, wow, this is, if it were just up to me and my own proclivities for movement, I would not be choosing to move this much over the course of a day. But the demands of the day were such that that was just how it was for me. And now I do a lot more desk work, and it's sort of, I'm on the opposite side of things. Like I need to make a very concerted effort to bring movement into my day. It's like my day is not going to supply that for me. This needs to be something additional that I factor in and that I habitualize so that it happens even on the days when I really don't want to do it, because nothing else is going to force me to do it. No one else needs me to do this movement if I'm not showing up for myself to do it.
Yeah. Well, I also am somebody who, certain people, when they become a yoga teacher for a living, stop practicing their personal practice just by virtue of not having enough time or energy for it. I have never been one of those people. And these days, for sure, part of that is because I need to be able to take care of my own body. And if I don't have my personal practice, then things start to fall apart. And I don't have the time and the focus and the energy to put it back together while simultaneously teaching for other people. And so I need that time, and I claim that time for myself because I view this as a self-care practice. And if I'm not doing it for myself, I'm not going to be able to show up well when I'm teaching. It's also where I come up with a lot of I sort of teach from like a theory perspective. Like I come up with these different movement theories often, and I'll create a class around that. It's not the only way I create classes, but I'm trying things out in my body when I'm practicing that allows me to then develop something that might become a class later. And if I don't have that time, I'm just out of ideas. And then I feel like I get to my mat to create a class and I have nothing. And it's just works so much better if I've had that time. If I've even just doing somebody else's movement where you're like, oh, that's interesting how they put that together. And then, it filters itself through you and comes out completely differently on the other end. But it's all part of the conversation in terms of creation on top of all of the other benefits. But I've, I will keep on my calendar and not give up. I mean, I have clients asking me for the times when I have personal practice. I don't give them those times. I'm sorry. No, I am not available then. And I realize how much money you're paying me, but I'm not going to give up my personal practice. And you can either work with me at a different time or we won't work together that day.
Wow. What does your personal practice look like?
Well, it kind of depends. I mean, I do take live classes on the Lit Studio 3 to 4 days a week. So that can be part of it. And I also and more these days, play around with stuff within those classes. Like I'll even add 1 pound weights, even though it's not a weight based class, just for additional feedback. Or I have different props. Like right now I'm working a lot more with resistance bands because I think my body needs more of that. And I just like sneak it in while I'm doing all of the other stuff. So I'm not disturbing the flow of the class. I'm not distracting, but I'm doing stuff that is in line with what I feel like I need for my body. But then I also have like usually most mornings when I come down in the morning and I'm the first one up in the house, I have a chunk of time where I just play with movement and I explore some of the stuff that I've been learning from other teachers or just like a concept or whatever. And I just play with it in my body and I see how my body reacts to it in the hope of just giving my body what it needs over time and getting more aware of what those needs are at any given moment. And in the hopes of then that being supportive of whatever other movement I'm going to go out and do that day.
Interesting. How do you go about assessing those needs for yourself?
I guess I just tune into my body, and oftentimes I'm building off of some other idea that I've either like I'll see someone on Instagram doing something and I'll be like, I want to try that out. Or there's people that I take some more strength and conditioning classes from, and they have, a concept behind the movement that they're teaching in the class, or, several concepts, and I want to like develop that more for myself. So I was doing that this morning while I was practicing. I was, so I did my own kind of personal stuff in the morning. Then I took a class on the Lit Studio, and I took some of what I had played around with this morning and just put it on top of the yoga class that I took, where it wasn't stuff that was being cued by the teacher, but it's stuff that I want to play around with and see how it impacts like yogic movement, so that then I can take the stuff that I feel like works well and design and develop my own classes to offer people around that. And so that's kind of often how that works. Sometimes I'll decide like this is something that I think works well for me, but I don't know how well it'll work for other people, and maybe I don't bring it in the form of a class. But other times I'm convinced like this is actually really going to help other people, so I'm going to, put that in my brain to take my next class and chew on that idea during the class.
Are there any first principles of movement, whether those first principles be something physical like always turn your glutes on first, or something psychological like how we're looking at the practice. Are there any first principles of movement that stand out to you as being something very true?
I don't think I really operate in a first principles perspective.
Interesting.
I'm pretty fluid with stuff, and my goal is to just feel as good as I can in my body. So
Yes.
I'm always looking for the like what doesn't feel great, or where do
Mm.
I feel like I need to build strength, or I mean it's very infrequently that mobility is the issue for me, unless
Mhm.
it's like working around an injury, in which case you got to be quite like aware and careful with that stuff. But I think my principle is that I want to feel good, and it's how do I accomplish that? And there's a lot of ways to get there, and it's just a question of what I'm playing with at a given time. And then if I have, this morning, for example, my low back was hurting because I went dancing yesterday. So then I did a number of things to address that so that I can go about the rest of my day and not have my low back being a little achy be the main feature of my experience today.
Mhm. Do you ever feel unmotivated in your practice, or have you been doing this for just so long that it's baked into who you are and you kind of always feel like doing a little bit of something?
I think the lack of motivation for me comes when I'm bored, when I'm not learning. And so that is part of the reason I've studied as many different styles as I have, is because I'll reach a certain point where I'm like, okay, I think I've understood everything that I can understand in this context about this movement or from this teacher. And then I feel totally devoid of motivation. And for
Mhm.
me, then I need to go seeking some other kind of movement, a different instructor. Yeah, so the variety is key. I know that's very different than other people who will practice the same style of yoga their whole life, or like the movements that they go to the gym and do are the same every, you know, throughout their life and those kinds of things. But for me, it's the innovation, the feeling like there's some kind of progression, or, even just thinking about within the scope of practicing lit, my my ability to do certain poses, particularly the challenging ones like a forearm balance or a handstand, that has progressed over time. That's a motivator in and of itself to say like I know and I feel progress is being made. um and for some people that might be enough to just like exist within the shape and try to refine it over time. I like to also have exterior input, which I turn to other smart people and I think, what are they working on? And then I filter it through me and I try it out and I'm like, all right, yeah. And then through that kind of conversation and turnover is how I stay motivated.
Such a smart way of looking at it, like keeping yourself engaged in a learning process. And part of that, there might be some sort of goal
Mhm.
orientation there as well. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with me. You would mention a
Sure.
couple of times, with yoga, it gives you something different than dance gives you. It's more of a self-care thing. It's more of taking care of your body. What does your yoga practice give you that nothing else does?
I mean, a lot. It's like hard to parse out yoga from the other movement stuff that I do,
Interesting.
per se.
Sure.
Like I said, it is my creative outlet because it's how what I teach. Um, and I don't think of dance as like a destructive movement. And in fact,
Mhm.
I have made a concerted effort to add more dance back in, because I do think that there's a fundamental aspect of healing that exists in just like moving your body in a free way, and also to a rhythm. And I've been coached to do that by certain movement practitioners who I trust. But for sure, yoga is a time I set aside when I do my personal practice to really just like focus inward. Some of the other movement stuff I do, like if I go to the gym, it's a lot more external input because of the environment of other people around. And I mean, that's only because now I'm not practicing in a yoga studio when I do my personal practice. So there's not that. There's not loud music that I don't like, that somebody else has picked or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's like interesting because at this point, I don't even want to like segment my yoga from the other movement stuff that I do, because I think it's all part of a system where the goal is to, just feel good and move well. And some of that is done on a yoga mat and other aspects of it are not.
Fascinating. Thank you for combining all of that with me for me. And what just like really stood out in what you said was moving in a fluid way to rhythm. And I feel like that's going to stick with me for a while. I'm going to have to, there's like this self-consciousness for someone who doesn't really dance and has never been into it and doesn't feel good at it. There's a certain self-conscious aspect of it for me. But I totally understand what you're saying about the fluidity and the rhythmic aspect of it. You're making me want to go out and dance right now. Let me put it that way. So
yes, but like honestly, the body, like to drill down on that a little bit, our body has a desire to move reciprocally in a rhythmic fashion. I mean, if you just think about walking, and for many people, if you were to walk on beat, whether it be to a metronome or a song that you enjoy, that has the potential to give the body more awareness and more sense of balance as a foundation to build on top of more complex movements in which you're building more complexity, but with that same idea as the foundation, where otherwise you can do a shape on one side of your body and a shape on the other side, and they can feel quite different. But there's a lot of strategies, one of which is to move in a rhythmic fashion, which can get you to a more balanced place of being. And so that's like a concept that I certainly connect with. When I heard it, I was like, hooray! This is what I've always thought all along. Thank you for verifying this, that moving to the rhythm can be quite healing for people. And it's just a good sensory input for your nervous system, for your body, to help you, and not everyone feels out of balance or out of whack, but that is certainly an experience that I have been having in a more significant fashion over the last few years. And, anything that can allow me to feel more in balance is a positive.
do you think people can get the benefit of the rhythmic movement if they're just turning on Elvis in their living room and just moving in a fluid, free way, rather than it being like a salsa structured sort of thing?
100%. Like literally just put on the music and walk in a circle, and then turn around and walk in a circle the other direction. It doesn't have to be that complicated at all. You can step touch all day. It doesn't need to be much, but it's just like input into your system that is balanced side to side. And I think there's a lot of potential there, although it's hard to find the exact right setup to be able to do, yoga type moves to rhythm. It just gets complicated in the way to like actually put that into action. But that's something that I've played around with in a variety of different context, I taught a choreo yoga class once a month where I'd actually create a song length yoga routine that we would learn in parts like a dance class, but it was yoga moves. And then by the end of the class, we would do a whole song worth of yoga moves that were on beat to the rhythm. And that was super fun. But there's room to grow that. And certainly there are styles of yoga I see creeping in. I forget one I saw on social media not that long ago where this is kind of what they're doing. So
Okay. I might have to involve this in my morning routine. It's like every day turn on a song and walk in a circle one way, walk in a circle the other way, and see what happens from there. I'll report back.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
awesome.
So, I mean, even the way that you're talking about this, because for me, even yoga can be very serious, and it can get into, if I don't like the way that I'm doing something, or I think that I should be doing it quote unquote better or something like that, there can be a lot of the inner critic voice that comes out. And just even being a part of this conversation for the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, there's been this feeling in my solar plexus that's more of just like enjoyment, like this idea that like movement can just feel free and enjoying, and it doesn't have to have this whole performative aspect to it. Although I know that what you were talking about with dance background and stuff, there's when you start codifying it like that, there is definitely a performative aspect of it. But if I can peel that back and just, I'm dancing for no one in my living room, it's emerging from this inherently joyful, celebratory place internally. And it feels to me like this is a feeling we deserve. We deserve to have this as human beings. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, I imagine you've experienced this in all sorts of different ways in your different movement practices. What is the connection between movement and life satisfaction?
I think they're directly connected. It is the easiest, most direct route for me to feel a sense of satisfaction or fun or joy, and even in a subcontext of seriousness. Like, I am a serious person. I always have been. I've, been a serious studier all my life, all of that stuff. Dance, movement, that is the context in which I can be both serious and find joy simultaneously. And that they all work in tandem to allow the joy to come out a little more fully, which is perhaps why I'm so wedded to it. I mean, who wants a life that doesn't have enjoyment or satisfaction?
Thank you for making that connection between seriousness and joy. Because I think sometimes seriousness gets a bad rep. But I've also always been a very serious person as well. And I find there to be a lot of utility in that. Besides the fact that I just feel like I naturally am that way. So trying to not be so serious feels like it's going against my nature. But I love that seriousness can coexist alongside playfulness and joy and celebration, and that those don't need to be polar opposites.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of encapsulating what my experience is and also what I'm trying to convey when I'm teaching. Like, my tagline is yoga for the fun of it. But obviously I'm not just coming in with sparklers. I'm coming in with, I hope, a lot of intelligence behind what it is that I'm teaching, to be able to create a context in which people can have fun. If I am not on top of my movement, if I am not adequately able to communicate what it is that I am looking for, it's not going to be fun for people. And yet, if I can be on top of those things and use my gifts then I can show people this can be fun and very useful outside of the context of this class for you and your body and your experience.
Mm. Wow, thank you for this entire conversation. I didn't really know where this conversation was going to end up, and um, just your background as a dancer is something I can't really relate to it that much, but is so interesting to me. And then the perspective that you have about movement, about your body, and about life through movement. I feel like I've benefited from so much in this short conversation together. If people want to experience some of this Teagan magic for themselves, how can they practice with you?
Sure. So I have a website, yogawithteagan.com, and I also have listed on there my schedule, but I have a on-demand online library of over 250 classes that I filmed that are available at any time. And I teach a few Zoom classes a week as well. So you can practice in person and you can find details for that there. Yeah.
Amazing. Is that the schedule you were referring to? The schedule is for your Zoom classes?
Yeah, and then I have my other, like I have an in-person class in a park in the
Oh,
city. So it's just like whenever I'm teaching, it'll be listed on my schedule on my website. And of course, I'm always happy to do private or small group classes. I love working with anyone who wants to work with me.
yeah. Who's a good private student fit for you?
It kind of runs the gamut. I work
Mm-hmm.
with high school goers. I work with youth up to like early 20s dancers. I work with um, a fair number of retired people. I also work with people who are not retired but are not fitting in as much movement as they want into their life. And so, I just show up once a week and I make them do stuff. And it really helps. I see myself as someone who is there to hold other people accountable to their movement and to motivate them. And I can operate on a number of different levels. So I will come to you with the amount that you want to engage with the information that I have to offer. So some people I work with, I drill down very deeply into all of the stuff I'm thinking about, learning about, teaching, etc. Other people, it's very superficial. It's literally just what movement are we doing and how do we get from here to there? Because that's what
Mm-hmm.
they are asking for. So, it just depends on the individual. I have other people who come to me with a specific issue that they want to work on, and we workshop it. We come up with different strategies. They go home, they come back the next week, they want to work on something else. We do that. It just goes across the board. And then I also have other teachers who I do more like workshoppy stuff that I'll chat with. We'll work on teaching strategies and other movement questions and just kind of do like a mentoring type of thing too.
Amazing. Well, Teagan, are there any parting thoughts that you want to leave this conversation with?
It's not always easy to find joy in the movement itself. That does potentially take time to develop because there's a sense of confidence that you have to develop over time that will then allow you into the window of enjoying the movement that you're doing. But most of the time, taking the time to do the movement does result in feeling better after the fact. And that I
Mm-hmm.
hope is enough to keep people engaged in the process. So you can go
Yes.
do something and dislike the entire time, but if the rest of your day or the rest of your week is improved by that discomfort, that you endured for however long it was, then know that if you keep showing up, that discomfort lessens over time, your confidence grows over time, and eventually you may even get to a place where there is a sense of joy even in the challenge. And it's one of the few things I think that as adults we have an opportunity to be proud of ourselves for easily, because it's not the norm, and it's not the easiest thing to keep showing up and moving. And yet if you do it, your potential continues to expand. You can feel proud of yourself for the effort that you put in, knowing that it is against the grain and even against your personal tendency might be the case. And those are the opportunities that are like more fleeting as an adult. And it's something that you don't have to rely on someone else externally to validate for you, even though they may.
Mm-hmm.
But you can feel it and you can experience it, and then you can give yourself the accolades for doing it. And you may even need to set up external gratification strategies. Okay, I moved X number of days this week. That means I get to do Y, whatever it is. Read my favorite book or go get ice cream. I don't know. But I think that it is worth the effort to be in that conversation, to offer yourself. It's almost that continual sense of hope that things are not just in a continual decline, but that there is more room to grow and expand. And it might not be only through movement, it might inspire you to grow and expand in other parts of your life.
Wow, so well said. Thank you so much for sharing the fact that it might not be enjoyable in the moment, but it might be one of those things that you feel better after having done it. And now you have that little win under your belt, so that tomorrow, hopefully it's a little bit easier for you to come back, even if you still hate it tomorrow. You might hate it the whole time, and then afterwards you get another little piece of that, oh, but I feel better now that I did it. And with enough repetitions of that, perhaps the joy starts showing up in the challenging moments, in the movement itself. And I think that's such an important fact of life to really understand, because I think a lot of times we think that if I'm not enjoying something in this moment, it's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. When in fact, that's not correct.
It's not that simple. I mean, of course, if you're doing a movement and it feels wrong, I'm not telling you not to listen to that. Like, your body has inherent intelligence. So it's about finding a movement strategy that you believe in, whether you enjoy it or not at the outset, and then working your way through it in a way that honors what you know about your body and the messages you get from your body, to help you get to a place where you feel better, maybe even good, doing those movements.
Yes, thank you. Well, Teagan, it's been a little over an hour. I've so enjoyed this conversation with you. People can find you at yogawithteagan.com. That's spelled Teagan. Is there any other place you'd like to direct folks if they want to learn more about you?
It's the best place. You can also contact me on my website via the contact form, which sends direct to my email. And then you can follow me on Instagram at Yoga with Teagan. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've had an absolute blast.
Yay. Me too.
Okie dokie, that was our conversation with Teagan Schweitzer. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. One piece of homework that I'd like to give you from today's lesson, if you're up for it, is sometime today, right now if you can, but if you can't, I get it. Maybe you're listening to this in the car or on a hike or wherever you may be. Sometime today, turn on a piece of music and walk in a circle in one direction. And then halfway through the song, turn around and walk in the circle in the other direction. And just see how that goes for you. I'm actually going to send a video of me doing this exact thing to my favorite Bare Naked Ladies song to my email list. So definitely make sure you're subscribed to that if you aren't already. And if you'd like to get closer to Teagan and explore some of the yoga magic that she has to offer, then check out all of the links in the show notes or description, whatever platform you're listening on, it should be there for you. And give her style a try. It's always fun to try new things because you never know. Like she talks about in there, some ways of moving feel more joyful for her than other ways of moving. And so a big part of this is learning to listen to ourselves and trust ourselves and keep experimenting and exploring until we find something that sparks that joy of movement within us. That's your homework. Let me know how it goes. In fact, do that and then leave me a review on this podcast. That'll help me, but it'll also help you consolidate your learnings and activate more of what we learned into behavior, which is what we're always going for. So until that next time, my friend, be well, go walk around in a circle to your favorite song and tell me how it went. I'll see you soon.